If you follow Hungary, you're certainly fed up of controversial statements of their everlasting Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He does not shy to support Vladimir Putin during aggressive war against Ukraine. He is ready to break European unity on Russia, and he speaks publicly against European values. With all of this, he's been elected 4 times in a row, mostly focusing on rural voters. But there is another Hungary. Gergely Karácsony is head or mayor of the capital of Hungary, Budapest. Now he is a very popular politician and he speaks out publicly against Orban. European Pravda is Ukrainian media, and we came to Budapest to talk to Karácsony on Ukraine, on Russia and on war. It was to listen to this interview. Mayor spoke in Hungarian and the translation was provided by his team, therefore we apologize for some sound issues. But anyway, it's very interesting. Mayor, thank you for agreeing to meet us, I have a series of questions about Hungary and Ukraine and our relations. But I will start from the one which is important for many Ukrainians. Is Hungary pro-Russian?
Hungarian society is an extremely divided society that is to a large extent influenced by Hungarian government propaganda. Hungarian government is always trying to position itself as the sole representative of the Hungarian people. But if you look at Hungarian society, government is never the same as its people. So I think the overwhelming majority of the Hungarian people take solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And while there is very efficient government propaganda and Russian fake news, and there are some people who believe the US is behind everything, and the government is also trying to position itself sometimes as a friend of Russia, Hungarians are more pro-Ukraine.
You see that the society is divided, and public surveys also show that, let's say, half are, I would not say pro-Russian, but believe to that propaganda, and another half do not believe. What makes these people different? They live in the same country, they listen to the same TV channels.
There's a group that is always supporting Fidesz. Some of them who really do believe propaganda. But even if you look at Fidesz voters, they are not pro-Russian. But the majority of them is not pro-Russian. There are some people who do believe it.
Helyzetértékelést, kicsit elmosó helyzetértékelést adni.
The Hungarian government is not trying to look like they're pro-Russian. They're trying to look like they're pro-peace. Their desire to peace that is actually, if you look at it, it's a pro-Russian aspect. The Hungarian opposition that I'm also part of, that are take solidarity with Ukraine, we have been accused of being pro-war in the campaign. But it's also very important to note that when the Ukrainian refugees started to come to Hungary, the Hungarians were welcoming them warmly, and the people of Budapest were welcoming them very warmly and took a very proactive part in accommodating to them. And just today, a couple of hours before, we've just started a transit with generators and heaters and food to Ukraine. You have to see that Hungarian people are helping the people of Ukraine. Of course, there is a small minority that believes Russian propaganda, but if you look at the majority of people, their heart is with Ukraine.
Elhitte, de a túlnyomó többség azt gondolja, hogy szívében és lelkében az ukrán emberek oldalán áll.
Unfortunately, this minority is present, and also we hear statements that compromises Ukrainian sovereignty, and that even pretend to take part of Ukrainian territory. Do you see that this danger is really there?
Nem becsülöm le ezt a veszélyt.
I don't want to underestimate such sentiments, and I do feel shame that my country is being looked at internationally like one that is siding with the Russians. I hope that very soon the war will be over, Russians will go back to Russia, and then the Hungarian government can return to prioritizing humanity and being humane. At the moment, sometimes it's prioritizing short-term economic interests.
De ez a retorikájuk, ez a politika, ez megbukott, hiszen Magyarország drágában kapja a gázt Oroszország.
And their rhetoric simply failed, because not only we are on the wrong side in this conflict, we're also not getting any economic gains. We're being sold energy on a much higher price than the rest of the world. So now we can see that the government's rhetoric is collapsing. I mean, it was kind of a telling sign that when Putin said that Romania, Poland and Hungary have territory claims against Ukraine, as opposed to the governments of Romania and Poland, our government did not take a firm stance and did not condemn this. And that shows that Putin really knows how to manipulate the public opinion of some countries, because if you look at the Hungarian electorate, there are some groups in the electorate that you can appeal to with such claims and such promises. But I also think that the majority of Hungarians want the Hungarian speaking in Transcarpathia to live in peace and prosperity, and it's more important than redrawing the borders of Hungary. And if you look at the press that is critical to the government in Hungary, you can read a lot about those in the Ukrainian army who are Hungarians that were fighting against the Russians. These acts of heroism was really looked at as an example.
És magyarként, kárpátaljai magyarként harcoltak az oroszokkal szemben, és ez a magyar, a kormánnyal szemben kritikus sajtóban ez egy nagyon nagy hír volt.
What can we do in Ukraine, and what can you do in Hungary to prevent such rhetoric of change of borders? Because even if this rhetoric appears, even if it is not like an official governmental policy, it ruins relations, particularly when we have another war, another country pretending to change our borders.
Én azt gondolom, hogy most nyilván
When it comes to the Hungarian public opinion, first our immediate task is to guarantee territorial sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine. But then after, what could help the relationship is that Hungarians living in Transcarpathia, they should also feel that it's their war and it's their state as well.
Biztonságot jelent.
How do you see, what drives Orban to be so much dependent from Russia?
Nagyon nehéz megmondani, hogy Orbán, aki egy orosz...
It's incredibly difficult to say why Orban has changed his politics. He was staunchly against Russia, not just at the time of the regime change, but also just immediately before his election win. Very difficult to really see the reasons, but it has to be economic. The Hungarian government is in a perpetual conflict with the European Union, fighting against the rule of law and European values in Hungary. And Orban might have thought that he can strengthen his position against the EU if he looks for allies in the East, alliances with Russia, with China. But then this relationship has changed because Russia's always also recognized that they can use Orban to prevent and block and veto some of the decisions in the EU that are not beneficial to Russia. So instead of now Orban using his Eastern alliances, now Putin is using Orban. And at the same time, and I don't want to defend the Hungarian government, but we also have to look at the broader context. But if you look at the consensus that was led by Chancellor Merkel, and also when it comes to how the annexation of Crimea was more or less accepted in the EU. It really made a precedent in the EU how this Russian influence can actually become more and more dangerous, and there was no control against it. And there's another global aspect that as a green politician I want to say. So long as the world economy is based on fossil fuel, those countries that are not democratic and have an abundance of fossil fuel will use their power to execute their interests, to blackmail other countries politically.
Politikai zsarolásra és hatalmi ambíciók szolgálására fogják használni. Azt remélem, hogy a világ fölismeri.
I do hope that the EU and the world will recognize that you cannot accept when a country is threatening another country's territorial sovereignty and integrity, and then they will also recognize that we have to free the world's dependency on fossil fuels.
Nem csak az orosz függést, hanem a fosszilis energiától való függéstől meg kell szabadítani Európát.
You realize that Hungarian-Ukrainian relations are in crisis, aren't you? Correct? Mm-hmm. So, do you see that there is a chance to overcome this crisis with current government? Orban is flexible. Is he flexible enough to do that, or it's too much and too far?
Ez egy jó és nehéz kérdés.
Very good and very difficult question to answer. What I know for sure is Orban tends to change his opinion even in very fundamental issues. And you also have to see how they're representing completely different things going against each other. So Orban voted in favor of all the sanctions in the EU and then create this incredibly expensive propaganda campaign with billboards against the sanctions. And I'm sure that when we're talking about how to rebuild Ukraine, Orban will be lobbying for corporations connected to Fidesz. His politics is not based on the national interest, but on the very short-term economic interest of his power circles.
Hanem a saját szűkebb körének az érdekein alapszik.
Are there some Hungarians that perceive Ukrainians as threat, as enemy?
Valóban a magyar kormány számára mindig nagyon...
Hungarian government always needs an enemy that it can blame for things not going well, because otherwise they would have to admit that they can't govern. And that he had his attempt when he positioned Zelensky as his political opponent, but that did not succeed. And now, one of his last remarks, he likened Zelensky to one of our martyrs, Imre Nagy, who was executed after this 56 revolution. But now this enemy does not work, because now we return to Brussels and the sanctions, and even though Orban voted in favor of all the sanctions.
Viktor az összeset megszavazta, de a magyar gazdasági problémákat, amelyek a szankcióval egyébként nem függnek össze, ezeket megpróbálják ráfogni Brüsszelre, és újra Brüsszel az ellenség.
Will Hungary stay in the EU for sure, or Orban can even lead it from to exit?
Ahogy mondtam, mindig.
As I've said, Orban is always driven by short-term economic interest, and the EU gives us a tremendous amount of money. Unfortunately, there are also some values which Orban does not like. But as long as Orban is getting out in a positive sum, he's not going to leave the EU.
Thank you very much for that meeting, and thank you for your time and for supporting Ukraine.